I think everything you were
Yeah.
saying, Enrica, I think speaks to very familiar accounts that we hear from teachers where very commonly we say, oh, last time I did this lesson, my students loved it. They learned the language. And I tried it again today with a different class that was just like the first one, and it was an absolute disaster. Or my
Mm.
students have been learning English for 5 years. Why can't they simply understand that they have to use an S in the third person singular? It's not that hard. And I think that's because, as you said, I think that's what I like about the concept of mediation, and that's what I like about the complex system theory or complexity, is that it really emphasizes this notion because because you taught something, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is what's going to be learned, right? Because language learning is messy, language is unpredictable, is very nonlinear, and as we say in one word, it's complex. I think my question to you before we jump deeper into mediation is, why is it so hard for us to understand that? Why are we still looking at language from a very atomistic perspective? Why are we still teaching bits of language and expecting learners to synthesize all this information and then produce a language, as opposed to starting with language as as a communicative means to express messages? Why are we still getting this wrong? And I think you've traveled the world, so you probably have a much more expansive view than we do.
Oh, because the answer is because it's more difficult. Uh, the other seems very easy. It's this you do one bit, another bit, and then you expect that magically the students will be able to combine all these bits to do a kind of, I don't know, a dialogue or write something. As you said correctly, an atomistic view. But so that's the short answer. So why do we do? Because we tended to do the
Yeah,
easier thing,
simplifying it.
or at least what appears to be easier. The more profound view is that we in the Western society have always have been increasingly impacted by the theory of Descartes, the idea that you to analyze a thing you have to separate, to go to the basic elements and analyze each of them separately. This is what you need to do in order to understand the big phenomena. And this has been a disaster in many for think of the environment. Looking at the environment like that for many years has been, oh, there is a problem, and we use this solution for that problem, thinking without thinking that maybe that solution will cause another problem in the environment. That's a linear thinking. You address one thing at a time. And by addressing that one thing, you might be successful in solving one problem, but you may make disasters or create a new problem that you hadn't foreseen. So the idea of complexity theory is more of in terms of models, like you have the information that you get into something, you see how the system reacts, and you make certain deduction from there. You say, okay, what has happened? And in fact, even Larsen Freeman talks about retrodiction, no? Instead of prediction, which is something that we really should pay much more attention to,
Can you
because
elaborate on that? I'm
what
not familiar with the term retrodiction.
yeah, the idea that you analyze what has happened in
Mm.
this, and from there you model, you draw your conclusions instead of having something you predicted that something would happen,
Mm.
and then you say, oh, it didn't happen or it happened. You really go with what has what you can observe, or you can't even observe. What is the result? How the system has changed after we have introduced some change, we have done an action, how the
Right.
class has reacted. For example, the example you mentioned, the most important thing is to ask why it didn't work this time. So where there is something different. Maybe the class was, I don't know, the composition of the class, something they had done, the way. So having this kind of thinking
I
is
get it.
important.
It
Yeah.
sounds very similar to Daniel Sean's reflective model, and he divides them into reflection in action, which is at the moment, and then reflection on action, which happens after the event. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea is similar, like in encouraging people to reflect on their own experiences, their own actions after they have happened, to gain, perhaps the best word would be to gain a deeper understanding of the situation, of their thoughts, of their emotions and their behavior. Is that similar to what you're saying with retro?
Not familiar very much,
Hmm.
sorry, with that model. So maybe
But but
I'm
is that
not.
what you're doing basically, or just reflecting after it has happened? Okay.
Yes, yes. It's probably a bit more than just is, yeah. It's, yeah, of modern. Jean-Louis Lemoyne was an important researcher in complexity theories. He even talks about the complexity theory in French as théorie de la modélisation, because he says that what we can do is to create, to model, to understand after, and to have some kind of frame so
Mm,
that help us in our
got
actions.
it.
That's what we uh, basically we have to think of many aspects at the same. That's why that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's in a
Hmm.
sense more complicated, but once you have overcome the fear of thinking of multiple things, multiple aspects at the same time, then it's very liberating because you can change. It's non-linear. You can and in that sense, reflection
Hmm.
important. Yes, awareness is
Hmm.
word in mediation, in complexity theories. Agency is a key word
Hmm.
also because it depends how you act,
Right.
in while you're
I,
learning or
I,
teaching.
yeah. As you were speaking there, I was thinking a little bit about what Claire Cramsch says about negotiating across cultures and whatnot. And really, it's about knowing how to play the game, I believe, is the expression that she often uses, and having that knowledge, that understanding of maybe cognitive aspects of it, the interactional, but then also these other power dynamics that are at play when you're having
Yeah.
a conversation. And as you said, becoming
Yes.
comfortable with that and being able to see that. Yeah.
But also understanding that there are multiple layers behind your own trajectory and journey, your other languages that you speak, your identity, all these things are
Hmm.
there. So we either have the choice to pretend they don't exist, so make things very linear, very pure, or go with the messiness. You use the word messy because that's how we are as human beings. That's what is a class, and leverage to produce, to really have the students be part of
Mm.
something, learn,
Mm.
being involved. With the action oriented approach, that's what we have noticed,
Hmm.
this idea that the students are totally involved in what they do. They see a goal, they see that there's not a linear thing. You have to do first one thing, then another in a sequence. They can make mistakes because there's no other way to learn, especially a language. And but what is important is their artifact, their decision making, the fact that it's something real life oriented and not something, because students are including very young ones, because we had 200 teachers from the elementary all the way to the upper secondary. Kids immediately understand if what you ask them to do is just because they have to practice a structure, or if you're really interested in what they did during that, because
That's a good
there
point.
is something that do with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
There's going to be a presentation, there's going to be a multimedia product, where they can bring
Yeah.
things and do the others.
If
They immediately spot, even if you're very good, they understand. And the moment they spot that this is just, you're not really interested in what they say, but the structure, they disconnect.
Yeah.
They do very good, diligent students of them don't.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And
Most
I
of
know
them
you
are
want to
lost at that point.
oh, they're gone. Yeah, yeah. And I know Leo wants to jump in, so I'll just be sure. But just tying that back to teacher education, certainly something that Leo and Andrew and I have talked about is like maybe this should inform teacher education going forward and getting away from this idea that teachers teach rules and rather teachers teach choices, right? We actually help students choose make decisions about the right types of language to use based on what you just described, who they want to be, their own agency, like where do they see themselves and so on. Who are they in this future version of themselves? Yeah, I think it's beautiful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the difficulty when you do teacher education, to bring them away from the idea that they have to control everything. To delegate this control to the students is a difficult thing for the teachers because they have always been used. They are used to the fact that you, as a teacher, you have to control, which is linked to plurilingualism as well. There are many teachers who are afraid that, if they are allowed to speak other languages, what are they talking about? I can't control. But if they are on task, and this was something that was also explained by the researchers who adopt the sociocultural theory, that of course you have other tools. The language, your L1, for example, or other languages in the group are mediate knowledge. So what is important is that you are on the task and you use these languages. That's what they said already. No? So this is another important thing that we have incorporated. One of the things I haven't mentioned is that a big reference contribution on mediation came from the sociocultural theory throughout these last decades. So this informed also our work. So basically, two complementary theories, one more at a micro level, what happens in the exchange and how we construct knowledge, and a bigger one, a more macro theory, like the theory that studies the entire system.
So two things that you said. One was leverage the messiness. I like that. Was that what they're going to say? The same
where I
thing?
was going.
Where our brains are thinking the same. So I think Leo always asks people for their billboard at the end of the episode. We have yours already. That's it. Leverage the messiness. I think that's perfect. You also said that linear way of thinking in the environment example has been a disaster. So I'm curious, what's the language education disaster that's happened as a result of that way of thinking?
Yeah, I would say yes. Yes. Out of my heart, there was too much. That we had a big chance, which was the communicative approach. If it had continued to be developed as it had taught at the beginning, but probably either the time was not yet ripe, we didn't have so much reflection at the theoretical level behind, or I don't know, they say that one of the big problems was the development of the series of headway, where
Ouch.
in reality, yes, I don't know if this you can't publish, maybe you can't,
we
but
can.
Oh,
but
no, they're not a sponsor. It's
there are
fine. It's great. Yeah.
there are articles that show that studied the fact that this idea of changing, of pretending that it is communicative, but in reality the curriculum is driven by grammatical, so it's driven by grammar, but then made up very nicely with games and
Role plays
activities
and activities,
exactly, that look communicative. But as I said, let's pretend it's a fake thing. It's not. But it was not meant to be like that at the beginning. We had a kind of first very liberating phase, and then it became little games and the interesting part was either done separately, like in France there was all this development of the simulation globale, which was super interesting and super, in a sense, similar to the action-oriented approach. It was done in the classes, immigrant kids. It didn't go into the mainstream education. We had the task-based development, which is a very good thing. But as Larsen Freeman said, very often it was just a strong communicative. It's only recently that task-based has evolved quite a lot towards something which is much more similar to what we are trying to do with the action-oriented approach. I'm thinking of what Van den Branden is doing recently, his publications. They go in the same direction. So it's more than just a strong communicative, but it has been for quite a while, unfortunately, because that was a good idea. But now it has evolved. There are a lot of colleagues who do wonderful base, but what I'm saying is that we have, there have been a lot of disasters, to be very clear and to have a blunt reply. Separation of languages, the native speaker model, the idea of organizing the curriculum, the syllabus around grammar instead of not even language functions sometimes, really more notions. This idea of the famous communication gap was very often very minimal.
I feel like that was pioneered by the Headway approach, because Headway commercialized and commodified communicative language teaching into a very easily packaged product. And
Exactly.
I think I'm glad you said all of these things, Enrica.
Headway is the villain of ELT. Is that it?
I was going to say they
in a
trademarked
sense
clothes.
it is, but also some teacher training that was offered. And there is the expert that arrives, presents a lot of nice little games, and that's it. And because they are nice and little and easy, a lot of teachers say, oh yeah, that I can do in my class. But that doesn't change, doesn't help you address the messiness.
It's funny. Yeah.
You need to be the one that invents for that group, because one group is different from the other. You can't really have the same activity that doesn't work, that works over and over again for years, just because you learned it in a training session, as sometimes we see.
The question of if teachers need to earn more money to stay in ELT is really the wrong question these days. That one's largely been answered with precarity, 0-hour contracts, inconsistent work. The question isn't, do I need to earn more? The question really is, how do I make it work? Our TAP program, or Teacher Accelerator program, works with teachers like you directly to help make it happen. Through the process of being in the program, we help teachers build a lean, profitable, and pedagogically sound teaching business. 3 pillars that are really important to us. We started Learn Your English based on pedagogy, responsive pedagogy, evidence-supported teaching through research. One of the reasons we started this podcast as well. And we apply that now working with teachers to build courses, offers, and support for their clients in the same manner. The TAP program really is your roadmap to monetize your skills by, number 1, creating an irresistible offer, number 2, selling it effectively, and number 3, securing consistent clients. 3 pillars of any successful business. And while no one in ELT is building multi-million-dollar businesses in this fashion, it's a way for you and for all of us to first stay in the industry, to work with people that we love to help, to get paid for our work. And our goal for anyone who joins us in the program is within a 6 to 12 month period, you can make an informed choice, meaning you've built your business up to a certain point where you can use information to decide if keeping your school job and your business, or just doing the business on its own, is the right choice for you. If you want more information on if the program is a good fit for you or how we would work together, there's a link below. You can book a free chat with us. We can go through all of the details. There's lots of resources on our landing page, our website, and on this YouTube channel as well. And lots of interviews with clients that we've worked with where you can hear their stories, what it was like, and see if that resonates with you. If you're looking to earn a little bit more and really establish yourself in your niche, in your field this year, we'd love to chat. And now, let's get back to the show.
Hej, jag heter Rebecca och jag kommer ifrån Sverige och du lyssnar på Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast. Hi, my name is Rebecca and I'm from Sweden and you're listening to the Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
There's a lot to be unpacked here. I don't think we should go down that path, but we had a guest who basically has written a book called, I think it's called what's the title of his book? English Teaching, How It Is and How It Could Be, where his name is Jeff Jordan and he co-wrote this book with Michael Long. Yeah,
yeah.
and they were basically talking about that, how the commodification of language teaching, again, this whole idea of paying lip service to communicative tasks when in reality they're not really communicative tasks. You've mentioned a lot. And I think even what you said with regards to teacher education, Enrica, which to me is this oversimplification of two complex things, which is learning and teaching. There are two very complex activities that have been reduced to a series of actions, and in the case of language, a series of grammatical points that need to be taught in linear order, in linear fashion. And of course, you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges for teacher education and for teachers, and Mike mentioned this idea that teachers don't teach rules, they teach other things. And I think the word that we have for this is that I think in a way, we have left behaviorism behind, we have left the audiolingual approach behind, but the role of the teacher in the behavioral era has not changed. The teacher still thinks he's in control. The teacher, it's what we call not what we call, but there was a person who wrote about this, and more recently, Bill Van Patten calls this the Atlas complex. That teachers think that they need to carry the weight of learning on their shoulders. They're responsible for everything that happened in the classroom. And to go back to leveraging the messiness, is that the best way to define mediation? Because very recently, there was a very long conversation happening on LinkedIn, and there were about 35 to 40 teachers all chiming in and trying to define mediation. So I'd rather ask the person who came up with this idea of mediation along with your contributors, explain to us, is leveraging the messiness the best way to explain mediation?
Yes, but it's also trying to capture this languaging aspect of the process, because every time you language, like you use the language and you develop your language knowledge, you mediate something. You mediate knowledge, you mediate if you're a teacher, you can mediate concepts, and also if you're a student, or you communicate and you mediate communication with the culture also that goes with that. And you usually do that through some sort of oral or written text, which you also need to unpack. So all this going between is a form of mediation. It's a pretty complex concept per se, because we know that it has been studied by philosophers, by sociologists, by even in legal studies. No, there's quite a lot on mediation. So each discipline has seen mediation from a bit their angle, but what we try to do in languages is to build on what they have, their conclusion, what they've come up with, to say, okay, what can we do with all that in our classes? And that's why after a long process of really trying, reorganizing, drafting and redrafting,